Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Operations Room, a podcast for COOs. I am Brandon Medsinga, joined by my lovely co-host, Bethany Ayers. How are things going, Bethany?
I'm really tired. It's Friday. It's been really hot. I know we're in London, and this is basically what Londoners do as soon as it gets over 25 degrees, which is 80-something in America.
Yeah. I mean, legitimately, we've had a pretty hot run, I would say, 30-degree plus weather for 4 days in a row. I mean, it was pretty brutal. I think night number 3, French doors are open in the master bedroom, and it was as hot outside as it was inside, and there was no breeze. So it was just boiling. It
was horrible. There's no relief from it. So anyhow, exhausted, not sleeping, it's finally cooled down. And then went to a COO roundtable dinner last night. It was a SaaS one.
Oh, the SaaS one. Oh, I missed out. Okay. I had my all hands last night, so we had drinks after the all hands. So that was my preoccupation.
It was in a new restaurant. I mean, because normally we go to Zetter House or Zetter Townhouse in Farringdon. And this one was art, yard, and bar. Just south of Blackfriars in a brand new hotel, a brand new Marriott. The food was excellent, because with a hotel you're never quite sure, but this was on the side of good food. And we did our introductions. So I went to a dinner 2 weeks ago. I haven't been to a dinner in about 6 months, and then I've gone to 2 in 2 weeks. And so in that one, which was just a more general COO roundtable, we did introductions. And when it got to me, I just said, oh, and co-host of a podcast. I'm not sure if anybody here is a listener. And everybody raised their hands. And so I was like, okay, I don't need to introduce myself then. So I'll just go on to news. Anyhow, at this dinner, I kind of said the same thing, and everybody just stared at me blankly, other than a couple listeners. Anyhow, then I did my intro, the next person, blah, blah, blah. And the person sitting next to me afterwards said, oh, I've just discovered your podcast. I'm really loving it. Oh, okay, blah, blah, blah. And then I didn't even think to ask this question. Somebody else did later on. It was like, how did you find the podcast? ChatGPT.
Really?
Yeah. I know. How exciting is that?
Yeah, SEO going on here on ChatGPT.
Yeah, but it's not even, it's better than SEO, isn't it? So he put in, what podcast should I listen to as a COO? And we came up.
Okay. This is actually really good when you think about it. I mean, just more broadly, obviously, Google AdWords and keywords, all that's going to die, pretty shortly, I think. So ChatGPT discovery, if we're like the premier podcast being presented back to people, that's fabulous.
We didn't even know how we did it.
I suspect, but like the fact that we did the custom GPT some time back, we loaded all of our content in there, and they've obviously sucked that back into the vortex of OpenAI. So I suspect they're somehow knowing that we exist, and therefore they're presenting it back to people. Any other action in the Bethany world?
So it was announced this week that I'm leaving Peak, because I'm leaving in 2 weeks and a day. So it's quite good to have that news out there.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, that's great. The announcement is out. It's like something off your chest a little bit. You can now talk about it with people.
I can talk about it, and I am immediately irrelevant. Like this is this is clearly how lame duck presidents feel. Like as soon as they know that you're not coming back, it just doesn't matter. I had a one-to-one with somebody where normally the one-to-one is jam-packed with so much content and trying to sort through stuff, and we barely fit it all into an hour. And met on this Wednesday, and like 15 minutes in, I'm done. I don't have anything else. So we kind of like chatted a little bit more for another 10 minutes, and that was it. Yeah. So now my power is gone. My wisdom is gone. So it made me laugh, but then it gave me a bit of extra time back at the end of the day. So I wasn't complaining. I'm going up to Manchester next week and the week after, and then that'll be it. And whether or not I ever go to Manchester again, I wasn't planning on leaving drinks, but somebody in my team insisted. So there might be leaving drinks for 3 or 4 people, and then hand in my computer on the Friday, and I'm done.
Okay. So you're giving back the laptop. I feel like somehow, I don't know how I've managed this. Every company I've ever left, I always leave with a laptop, not because I'm stealing it, but because somehow it's part of the package.
I have the one from the last time I left Peak. I don't need yet another one. And then I'll get a new one very shortly. So I feel like I have one that'll tide me over.
Yeah, I cascade them down through the family. So my wife has, one of my former laptops.
So my husband cannot handle a Mac. Just having the buttons on the other side.
So he's the actual like a PC user, is that what you're saying?
I know, isn't that incredible? Like somebody who chooses to use the Microsoft world.
It really does date people. Like all sorts of things date people these days. Like the latest one that we had spoken of some time back. But like, if you're not on Notion, knowing Notion, using Notion, you're yesterday's news.
Yeah. I mean, I think it either dates people or just is corporate people, because corporates only use
MS Teams.
Fucking Teams. Yeah. But they're all in this Microsoft world. So.
Yeah. Somebody was asking me, so they use MS Teams and I guess the chat that's part of MS Teams, and they were just about to move to Slack and they're all very nervous. I'm like, what are you nervous about? Like Slack is 8,000 times better and way easier to use. And yeah, you'll be loving it in no time.
UiPath is all Microsoft everything, but uses Slack. Yeah, that just goes to show you how shit Teams is.
We have got a great topic for today, which is navigating through an uncertain world. We have an amazing guest for this, which is Jillian Reilly. She's the author of The 10 Permissions, and she is a speaker and change facilitator as well. So before we get to Jillian, I just wanted to walk through her 10 permissions and just reflect back on our conversation with her and see what we think. All right, so let's start with number one, because that's where we actually spent the majority of our time with Jillian as well, and I think that you were most interested in. So the first permission is to be willful. Which is, what do I want to do now, not what do others expect of me? Oftentimes with operations leaders, we are often in service of others, whether it's the CEO, the wider company, and we're just fulfilling expectations of what people want from us for the most part, as opposed to really asking ourselves, like, what do we think would be most beneficial for the company? That is an intro. What's your take on that?
So I actually have a story that's a bit relevant and almost operational. So yesterday I had a conversation with somebody who has the opportunity to become a COO, but is trying to decide whether or not they want to. It's a switch within the company. And it was a bit of, what is a COO? Do I have the skills? Is it possible? And I, of course, pointed them in the direction of the podcast in episode number 1 of What is a COO? It's an amazing opportunity. And you could see that they wanted to do it, but they just had to create all of these reasons why they shouldn't, or how it could go wrong, or how this needs to be a decision to make. And after we talked for about 45, 50 minutes, I basically told them that. I was like, you clearly want to do it. You light up when you talk about it. It's handed to you on a silver platter. Why invent reasons why you shouldn't?
I think when you join companies, you have this duality happening slightly, which is, you know that you need to prove yourself. So when it comes to the CEO, the leadership team, the wider company, you need to like exercise kind of chops and also some like visibility projects to make people feel like, yeah, this guy's on it or this gal's on it and she knows what she's doing. And there's like value being created there. And it's kind of like what's being asked of you more than anything else, right? So for example, for myself, there was a clear mandate for, here are the 5 things, Brandon, that I think you need to focus on at the outset. So you obviously need to do that and take that seriously. On the parallel side of things, when I join these companies, it's always about the end goal, which is, I'm getting an equity grant. I want that to be transformational for the company, but also for myself. What does Brandon think needs to get done in this business to get us there, basically? And that parallel track is what I want and what I think is best for the company, basically, and trying to like take those two dual worlds and do what is right for the business over a time period. I think is always like the challenge, I think, for operators and for myself as well. Number 2, go astray. Allow yourself to explore outside your defined role or identity. What do we make of that?
I think that is the role of COO, right? That's why we like it, is that we can stick our noses into any part of the business, be flexible, explore, not be sidelined or contained within one discipline, siloed into one discipline. I think it's like one of those things early in my career I didn't like, because the marketing person was a marketing person and you knew where they were going to go. The salesperson was a salesperson. And here I was like jack of all trades, master of none type thing. And how do I label myself? And I don't fit in, and what's my path? And then as always, your weakness, your biggest weakness and biggest strength are either side of the same one. And so as I got more senior, my ability to do everything and understand it all actually became my superpower, rather than hard to form a career path or an identity.
Next one is feel your way. So use your emotions and intuition as valid decision-making tools.
Don't create all of these intellectual reasons why you shouldn't do the decision that you know you're already going to do. If you feel it, and you know that that's what's passionate and where you want to go, do it. If you hate it in the end, you can always make a new decision. There'll be new opportunities. Like maybe you won't have the exact same options you had, but you'll have a new set, and it just keeps opening different branches of decisions. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's very tied to this idea of just taking things step by step a little bit, which is not overthinking, not having a grand master plan, but what is the next best move that I can make? Sometimes you have some data points, sometimes you don't, but you can usually sense like what is the best thing to do.
It's also just experience. That intuition is often, you have experienced many things in the past and it's pulling it together. And then again, I think as you get older, you trust your intuition more.
So this one I loved, by the way. So think small instead of think big. What is the most sensible, small, incremental step that can be done, and not thinking through all these catastrophe scenarios, thereby stopping yourself by taking that very first step.
I agree. I think it's very tied in with the trusting your intuition. And this is the side where you talk yourself out of things that you know are right. And also, it's very helpful when leading a team and everybody's a bit overwhelmed and trying to plan out the next 2 years or 5 years or whatever. But really, often in the companies we work for, you just need to do the next thing. You just need to do the next sprint. You need to just save this customer. I think some of it is you still need a North Star, and you need to know where you're going, and you need to have some principles on how you execute or make decisions, and then need to just deal with the problem in front of you. Like, this actually happens a lot in one of the teams at Peak, the catastrophizing, and then suddenly this problem is 2 months to solve and all of these issues and need all of these people. And then it's just like, well, can we just diagnose it? And I'm like, oh, we didn't push it into production. It's done. And it's a 5-minute process. Know what you're dealing with and then deal with that rather than all of the possibilities you could be dealing with.
All right. Last one, make believe. And we didn't really talk about this one so much, but I find it interesting. So make believe, reclaim creativity, make things that don't exist yet. A lot of ops leaders think of themselves as optimizers and not creators.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, whether you're in the ops world or not, or what way you're looking at it. Like when I had that time off, did my pottery class, you can see above,
Oh, I didn't even know that. Those are all your pots.
No, some are my pots, some are not my pots. And there's some other pots.
And they look too good.
Yeah, the good ones are not mine. The really plain ones are mine. And I think the problem is school decides that some people are creative and some people aren't creative, but humans are just creative. And it depends on what you're talking about. The fact that we're working in startups and scale ups and we're taking something that doesn't exist and creating a business is fundamentally creative. You're literally creating a business. You don't have to have like pretty stars on it and be able and have beautiful handwriting to be creative. It's just the way that you look at it. We can't help but be creative as humans. Sitting with a blank spreadsheet and then creating an entire business model, that is creating.
Yeah, you have a good point, because you're taking abstract thoughts and concepts and applying them and molding it into a pottery dish, in this case being a spreadsheet.
Yeah, and a good spreadsheet is truly a work of art. Stunningly beautiful, just in a different way. So I think people are creative every single day. And artists have just co-opted what creative means.
So on that note, why don't we move over to our conversation with Jillian Reilly. We are revving up the engine of the podcast and looking for a great brand to sponsor the show. We have over 7,000 listeners now across COOs, CEOs, founders, and operational professionals who are decision makers for all kinds of technology, including HR, planning, strategy, legal, and other tools.
It's Beth here. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the podcast, and we'd love to keep it going, but we're going to need to get some sponsors in order to do that. So if you work at a company that could benefit from speaking to listeners like you, or know of a company that might benefit, please send them our way.
To find out more, go to operationsroom.co/sponsorship. That is operationsroom.co/sponsorship.
So the book 10 Permissions, can you give us a bit of a sense of the thesis of the book?
Yeah,
Yeah, the thesis subtitle is Rethinking the Rules of Adulting for the 20th Century. I describe it as a playbook for navigating adult life in the current chaos. And part of what I just referenced was helping people navigate profound change. I think we are all navigating profound change that has been coming, over a decade. The social norms, the way we operate has been shifting pretty dramatically. In the book, I describe it as the great unraveling of sort of flattening of hierarchies and loosening of social norms. A lot of the boundaries that told us how to behave and how to show up have become much looser. And of course, now we're in this inflection point where change is about to accelerate or is in the process of accelerating tremendously. And the thesis is, if we're going to thrive in this, we need to give ourselves permission to operate very, very differently than perhaps we've been told or taught to. So those 10 permissions are 10 different ways to think about how you're supposed to navigate your adult life, different than sort of the default story that most of us grow up with or carry along with us. And really, in the end, it's about being more adaptive and responsive to change and prepared to grow and evolve throughout the course of your life.
When I think about your 10 permissions and I think about ages, I think there's different permissions that are more or less important depending on the age category that we're talking about. So if we think about the mid to late career professional that is doing really well, escalating the promotional ranks, they've got a family, they've got kids, they've got the house. In that age bracket of the 10 permissions, which ones do you think are the most relevant?
I always come back to the first one, which is be willful, which is a very primary question around what do you want? What is your desire to create? What is your desire for that next chapter in your life or that next thing that you want to create? Because I think a lot of times by the time we've gotten to that phase in our lives and that phase in our career, we've in many cases detached ourselves from our own desires, our own sort of drivers to create something or contribute something. We've been very sort of duty bound, if you will, and made all the right choices. I encounter and I work with a lot of people who get to a point who say, I actually want to do something different. What is that? How do I sort of tap a little bit into my own desire to maybe parlay whatever it is that I've learned, whatever the sort of platform I've created to maybe pursue something that feels like a little bit more of a reflection of my own gifts, my own experience, to, I won't say finally, but in a more meaningful way, translate a career's worth of experience and talent and assets into something that feels like a greater reflection of me. And in some cases at that point in your life, you feel like you've got a little bit more leeway to do that. So that's one that I would always turn people back to, because I think if you try and create change in your life without connecting to your own desires, you can often either find yourself sort of hesitating or adrift or confused. So to me, that's always the anchor for any sort of change or, pivoting you want to make in your life.
It's interesting. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago where it was C-levels who have had more than one C-level job. So we were talking about how we moved between roles. And then somebody was asking in the questions afterwards, kind of more specifically, I'm a CMO and no matter what I do, everybody just keeps making me be a CMO and I want to get out of that. And we were talking about how to rebrand yourself and came up with an idea of a Venn diagram with 3 circles, one being your passion, one being your experience / talent, and the third being your network, and being able to rebrand yourself by finding that intersection of those 3. And I think so often people think about their network and their experience, but if you want to move somewhere else, you have to find your passion, but you have to figure out what your passion actually is, not just what you think your passion should be.
Totally. And, also kind of maybe lowercase p rather than uppercase p, because I think when we start to talk about passion, a lot of people think that it needs to be some grand vision or grand contribution. And, I really think when you give yourself permission to drill down into that in terms of what is it that I want to be a part of? What do I want to create? What problem do I want to help solve? Or what kind of services or products do I want to help make available to people? Then you sort of free up a little bit of your own imagination around what that might look like. And I think that's such a great example that you've just raised of people getting a little bit sort of fixed into an identity of I am CMO. And one of the ideas that I talk about in the book is an I can versus I am mentality. So detaching your identity from your role, which I think is going to happen more and more and more for young professionals moving into the world today. But I think for us who've been at it a while, even allowing ourselves to look at, as you've just described, sort of some of our assets and capabilities and networks through that lens of, this is what I can do. And how do I bring that to a variety of different situations, depending upon how the world is evolving, depending upon where I am in my own life and career?
So I love talking about identity. Which one of the 10 leans towards that identity question?
Let me go to the second one, which is go astray, because I think for a lot of us, we were raised to believe that straight lines were everything, that standing in line and sitting up straight was how we proved ourselves to be good people. And we get in our heads that success looks like following a straight line. And our identity gets shaped and fixed very early by the idea of, conforming to an idea either that we have of ourselves or that the world has of us. And then we sort of stay in that for the remainder of our lives, because anything other than that feels rebellious, or as you get older, it feels selfish. So I think giving yourself room to accept the fact that you can and will be more than one thing over the course of your life. And obviously the premise of the book is that increasingly we have to allow ourselves that more flexible sense of identity if we're going to keep evolving and changing at pace. So I think a lot of the book is around sort of unraveling our tight grip on who we think we are and allowing ourselves to continue to explore who we can be and who we need to be, given the changes that are happening around us.
One of the ways that I have been thinking about identity, and I'm almost more on does your work need to be part of your identity, or can you have your work be separate to it? So the game that I play with myself is, if I can only have 3 labels to stick on myself to be my identity, what are those 3 that are permanent? And so for an example, for me, being a mother is part of my identity. Even if the horrible thing of my children not still being alive, I would still be a mother. Whereas being a wife is not part of my identity. If my husband and I divorced, I would not be forever the former wife of X. And so if you can only have 3, does work play into being one of those 3? And that's part of how I test my own identity.
Yeah, super interesting. And so I have 2 teenage boys, 17 and 14.
Me too.
Oh,
exactly the same.
No. Oh my gosh. Well, and what's so interesting is that coincidence. And when you asked that question, the first thing that came to mind was, okay, fine, mother. Of course, first one, mother is the foundational identity that is and will always be. Well, so fine. This is interesting. I observe in them that I don't think they will necessarily have as tight of a knitting together of work and identity as I was brought up to. I think some of, we are Gen X, I am Gen X.
I'm on the border.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Suddenly I was like, oh, okay. No, I am. I will wave the Gen X flag and say, it was probably maybe the first generation where we were so encouraged to knit our identity and our work together as one. And what I see in them is a willingness to look for things or be open to ways in which they will create security for themselves and create a livelihood that might not be the sum total of them, right? And maybe that's the side hustles and over a decade of people opening themselves up to those types of things, I think is creating a slightly more pragmatic, if you will, mindset amongst the next generation. But I don't know, do you observe that in your own children, or am I in a specific case?
I'm just petrified about my own children entering the workforce.
Yes, I understand that. And I actually did a talk with parents the other night about just this, that we, the current parents of the world, need help supporting our kids to move into this world, because I think it's very hard for us as parents right now. As I said, I don't have any prescriptions to offer them. Like my parents could say, if you go to a good school, you'll be fine. You'll go and get a job. There was a And again, this is part of what I talk about in the book, is that there were these if-then equations that made sense to us, or what I say is requirements and guarantees. So if you fulfilled the requirements, you were largely guaranteed a desirable outcome. And that is not the case anymore. It is a much looser playing field. And so how we support our kids to have a sort of mindset and set of capabilities to enable them to thrive in that world, it's very, very different. And I don't think we should underestimate that it won't look like the one we walked out into.
I definitely won't. I have one who, by virtue of just, I don't know, my husband calls him a surface dweller. And my husband says he's also a surface dweller. Like, they're not deep thinkers. They just like to look for things that are fun.
Okay.
Don't have massive plans. Like, I suspect he'll be fine because he'll just kind of wander through it. The other one is much more like me. He's already trying to decide which GCSEs he takes to maximize his chances of getting a job in the AI world, and not about what he's interested in or cares about. And I'm trying to get one to loosen up and one to just get a little bit more structure. I have these spectrums. They're both sitting on the either side of it. And so I'm worried about them for different reasons.
Well, I've decided we worry about whatever it is. We find something to worry about regardless of where they are.
I mean, this is also true. The one that was more tightly wound, like, he would have thrived much better in a world where all of the white collar jobs, entry-level white collar jobs, still existed. I read an article the other day that 50% of entry-level white collar jobs are going to disappear in the next 5 years. And so, of course, I'm freaking out as a parent.
Of course, we all are. I mean, you can't be alive and not be freaking out about the fact that the entire mental model that has shaped the trajectory of coming into adulthood is falling apart. And so the way I describe it is the shift from following the way to finding your way. When we were growing up, there were a certain number of paths. You picked the one and you followed it, which is what you're describing. Sort of your second son is still trying to do to some extent, to say, if I follow this, if I make one big bet and I think it's the right one, then I can stay in that and it'll sort of take me along. Whereas the other one is to say, you're going to come out and there'll be a range of possibilities. You might have to make your own. You won't know which ones are good. You're going to need to be far more exploratory. And that's going to come much more naturally, as you said, for your surface dweller. But yeah, I think of it sometimes as the difference between being in a hiking with a paved path and you follow it, and then the premium is on your ability to keep going and follow the signs, and versus being put down in the middle of the woods and saying, okay, you got to find your way. And we all know that when we do find our way through those situations, it's absolutely exhilarating, right? You feel like $1 million. So that's why I think, there's potential for something hugely satisfying to come out of this, but it is going to require a very different way of finding your way forward.
So this topic of uncertainty and kind of a future that is not knowable in front of us, that seems very unpredictable, I suppose. A lot of your permissions revolve around this idea, I think. Can you maybe just give us a bit of a shape on that?
Yeah, thanks for picking up on that. Yeah, the original premise for me was what I called the explorer's way. And it was this need that this uncertain world is requiring of us to be more exploratory. And the ones that you've just mentioned, those permissions that you just mentioned, are sort of operationalizing that, if you will. So for me, they're about how you expect to be able to move through your adult life. And I think as much as we know that we are living in a time of uncertainty, there's still this kind of expectation that success will look like ease and accumulation and a sort of one thing leads to another, that's what you buy for yourself. If you are reasonably successful, then you will expect to have a line of sight that's long enough for you to make plans, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that the lived experience today is not that. And I think it's very easy for people to start to then feel like there's something wrong with them. They're doing something wrong. Everybody else has a plan. Everybody else is sort of moving smoothly through their lives. And as you say, I think particularly for young people, the anxiety sets in, the self-recrimination sets in when it's kind of like, but this doesn't feel the way that I sort of expected it to feel, right? I expected it to be a little bit more get a job, get an apartment, get a car vibe, even though that's not what's happening for a lot of people. So yes, I think it's normalizing and leaning into a way of moving forward that might not have all of the predictability and all of the certainty. And therefore, your own lived experience of it is going to be quite different. You might feel at times like, I am working in 3-month increments, or I am working in year-long increments. I'm creating something, and I'm worried that I don't have a plan for next year, sort of thing. And so that permission is to say, it's okay. There will be times in your life where you will have to kind of pull your locus of control in, find your way through some deep uncertainty. And that doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean that, your life is falling apart. It means you're in a time of creativity and change. So it's sort of accepting the fact that some of what worked for us, late 20th century sort of big plans and big, 5-year visions might not be feasible anymore. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that, everything's falling apart. It means you've got to be extra attentive to learning and adapting and sort of being on your toes. And as you said, keeping that optionality alive for yourself.
We have lots of problems to solve all the time. And we have some people who just catastrophize and will turn the task that's needed today into 3 months of required resource and things that could go wrong, and an inability to start because it could roll into something massive. And I feel like with that team, I'm constantly saying, okay, well, that's a possibility, but we haven't diagnosed any of it. So what's the thing that we can do today to find out whether or not that's going to be an issue, and stop the catastrophizing so that people's brains are wasting so much energy on so many what ifs of the future versus what's the reality of today.
Right. Totally. So that's think small. I'm here. This is what I can control. And the story, I cut it from the book, but a lot of that for me came out of traveling through really wildly weird and wonderful places where I could have had a panic attack at any time if I what-ifed too much. So I had to just keep staying in the moment, staying very present, keeping my locus of control tight, looking around, figuring out what I could control and what I couldn't. But yeah, totally. It's your brain will, take you on the worst kind of ride if you let it in this world.
And then you waste your energy on that versus solving today's problem.
And I think it's so interesting how catastrophizing has become kind of our default. I mean, it's now completely normal and totally accepted. And almost if you're not catastrophizing, then you're not awake. So I think that's our collective response to some extent to the uncertainty. It's like to throw all of our anxiety and doomsday into the ether and feel somehow better that we're not alone. But, if you try and enter into those conversations with either a more optimistic or a more pragmatic voice, it's often like, oh, you just don't get it. Whereas I think, as you've described, actually what you're trying to do is find a way forward that will hopefully have a better outcome than sitting around worrying about, potential terrible outcomes.
Okay. I was going to get back to, I think is actually, we haven't gotten very far. I think we've gone from like 1, 2, and whichever one is think small, 5, but I'm going to go back to 1, which is, how do you figure out what you want?
No, I mean, for me, it's the most transgressive thing of all, right? And for me, it came out of a career in change and realizing that you were trying to push people to sort of evolve through change when they hadn't even connected to their own desire to move through that change to get to sort of a better place. And I realized how much people's sense of what they want is what I would describe as outside in rather than inside out. So you let the world tell you what you want. You outsource your wants to either your family or your community or your culture or your corporate, whatever, and then you let them tell you what you want and you say, yes, let's go. And that worked. In a very hierarchical traditional world, you scored points and earned benefits from doing what other people wanted. The simple reality is that now, first of all, you don't get as many points or rewards for just being compliant and saying yes. They're not going to protect you just because you do that. Your loyalty will not get you what it used to. And second of all, you've got so many more options and so many more choices. So you can get overwhelmed by them. I always say, I see it as like a muscle. And if for most of us, it's a muscle that doesn't get exercised very much and possibly hasn't been exercised since childhood. So start small with trying to tap into, what do I want to eat? What do I want to do on Saturday? What do I want to do with my friends? Like, literally just connect to the parts of you that feel something, to the voice inside of you that says, hey, I want spaghetti versus pizza or whatever it is. I think a lot of us try and figure out what we want to do with our careers, and we can't figure out what we want to eat on Saturday night. And you can't make big choices if you're totally unused to making small ones with any degree of intention. So there's a workbook that comes with the book, and a lot of it is really focused on super small, activating your agency and your intentionality through some of the smallest low consequence choices. Because if you leapfrog to the high consequence ones and then go, oh gosh, I can't decide if I want to quit my job or not. It's like, well, yeah, that's pretty serious. So why don't we work on just like getting in touch with you as a person who has desires and is allowed to act on them. And maybe some of them not, but at least if you're connected and more aligned in that way, it allows for a better conversation with yourself when you get to some of the higher consequence, more serious choices in your life.
I think that's fantastic. Another one that really resonates with me, because I feel like a lot of my life has been spent trying to figure out myself and what I'm feeling. One of the things I've noticed is the stories that I tell, because I've like for a while, and this comes back to my original question of, is this about your personal life or is it about your career? And there was definitely a part of me that was like, business was not who I was, and business is what I did and was not part of what I enjoyed. I might have been good at it, but I didn't enjoy it. And yet I've had multiple career breaks and then keep going back to business. And then at a certain point I realized, oh no, I actually enjoy it. Like, even though I felt like I shouldn't, it is something that I enjoy. So it's also like, what are those things that you enjoy that you tell yourself you shouldn't enjoy or can't enjoy, or it's not an acceptable thing to enjoy, and embrace those as well?
Yes. Oh, I think just the idea of desire, pleasure, enjoyment. I think some of what I've observed is we've moved into discipline and grit and rigor as our collective response to the increasing uncertainty. You know, if I cold plunge, if I get up at 5 a.m., if I journal, if I have this unbelievable structure overlaying my life, I will be able to somehow immunize myself against all the crazy out there. And it's like, great, if that works for you, fantastic. However, there's a whole scope of, there's something to tap into around enjoyment, around pleasure, around what lights me up, what makes me feel good. Because from that space, you are much more generative. You are a much better contributor when you are in that space. And I think we've underestimated the extent to which, you know, contentment, happiness is a wonderful place to operate from, because you are then able to take advantage of what's around you and contribute better. And I mean, having the conversations around, what do I enjoy? It sounds so basic, and yet the more you slip into your dutiful adult role, the more those conversations feel indulgent. They live on the ever narrower edges of your to-do list. And it's like, actually, that's pretty important, because I can't serve anybody from a place of deficit and duty and always like my outgoings always exceeding my incoming sort of energy and stimulation. So again, I think some of what's happening right now might allow for us to connect to those things and engage with them more than our parents could, or maybe even I could from at an early point in my career. So that's where I see some potential right now.
So maybe we can circle to the last one on your list. I'm very curious about this one, the make-believe number 10. So I have like a couple different thoughts in my head. Like, one is, you know, obviously when you're a child, it's all about make-believe, and slowly but surely it's beaten out of you as you get older for the most part. There's one other thought, which is I just did the all hands meeting. I hosted, I was the moderator last Thursday. And whenever I go in to moderate all hands sessions, this is like an improv set. And I'm just like, you know, it's like silly version of Brandon, just having fun with people and doing a bit of a back and forth and all that jazz. But number 10, make believe, bring us home on this one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've picked up already in the conversation that so much of this is about reconnecting to some sort of innate ways of being and doing that in many ways we lose or we have lost as we seek to become adults. And this one, perhaps the most, as you've just said. I think a couple things. So I describe it as make things you believe in, and perhaps more importantly, believe that you can make things, which, as you say, we lose that belief really quick. I think we probably all have some sort of experience that scarred us in an art class early on when we decided that we could not make stuff, that we were not artistic or creative. And from that point on, we don't engage with that piece of ourselves. And I think we've seen that as a capability for the few. The rest of us just go out and collect a paycheck and execute on somebody else's ideas. And obviously what's happening right now is the scope opening up for, and a requirement opening up for us to tap more into that capability to make things big and small. And I think podcasts are a brilliant example of that. A space that's opened up over the last, and obviously boomed over the last 5 years in particular, where people were like, hey, maybe we can make something that is of value to the world. So I think it's happening. I think it needs to accelerate that our understanding of our kind of generative capacity to make things that are responses to current problems, that are sort of reinterpretations of old things. One of the things I talk about in the book is think DJ, not Da Vinci. So, a DJ is remixing stuff that already exists to make something new to meet a specific need for a specific group of people of a night. He or she is not some grand master who's making something that will exist forever, but the need to mix and remix and reset for a specific need, pop-ups, places where people are finding ways to create things that are responsive and adaptive. And your reference to sort of improv, the need to behave more improvisationally, to accept the fact, again, that when you're improvising, I think we used to kind of feel like, oh gosh, I don't have it all together because I'm improvising here. And it's like, no, that's just what you're going to have to do a lot of, is to figure things out on the fly, to come up with a new solution, to make something that just works for now, but might fall apart, in the next day. That's okay. And that, again, is a mindset that I think we've got to allow ourselves to play around with and engage with in a way that I certainly did not. And again, for our listeners who are a little bit older, I think there's so much scope to get in touch with this. And again, I would say start small and just play around with things that interest you. But yeah, that's almost the culmination. It bookends the what do I want and what's my contribution. These two things bookend everything in between. And I think we're moving into a period where that conversation with self, embedding that into yourself, will become so important to us moving through the next 5 years, the next decade, not feeling like we're just responding and becoming irrelevant, but actually, figuring out how to make our best contribution to a world that's changing very, very quickly.
We unfortunately are rapidly running out of time, but nobody gets away without answering our final question, which is, we've covered so much today. If our listeners can only remember one thing, or take one thing away, I should say, what is it?
I think you're allowed to have a life that looks very different, perhaps, than the story that you were sold or the story that you told yourself, and that this world is requiring us to sort of loosen our grip on the notion of what good looks like as an adult. Okay. So it's okay. Give yourself a break. Allow yourself more room than maybe you thought you needed to discover what's possible of a moment, of a season in your life. Because the more that you listen to that voice that wants to explore something other than the status quo, the more that you're oiling your own receptivity and adaptivity to a changing world. And I think that in the end is what all of us need to really nurture in ourselves, is how do I evolve as the world does? I'm allowed. It's okay. It might not always be neat. It might feel very messy, and adult life isn't supposed to feel messy. But maybe in all that mess is a lot of the beauty and a lot of the joy and a lot of the sense of discovery and possibility that I think most of us need in spades right now. So yeah, give yourself permission to go and discover what's possible. and know that it's okay.
Lovely. So I will give us permission to end this podcast today. So thank you, Jill Reilly, for joining us on the Operations Room. If you like what you hear, please subscribe or leave us a comment, and we will see you next week.